this off then? Good morning, church. It's good to see everyone. It's good to see friendly faces here in the congregation, and I know we have a lot of friendly faces as well online today. So I'm glad you've come. And if you got here in some sort of serendipity, maybe you got that invitation that Pastor Aaron asked someone to send out. It's not a coincidence. You're intended to be in God's house. You're intended. You belong here, and we love you. So welcome. So we're in this series about the 10 Commandments, thou shalt live. I love that. I love this idea of thou shalt live about the commandments, because that's really what God's trying to tell us, right? He's trying to give us rules and guidance to say, this is how we live. This is how we live. And we've been through the first 5 commandments already. And the first 4 of those commandments, and the 5th one too, Pastor Mike talked about that last week, are really about motivating to get your heart right with God. To be right with God. They have, those first 4 and 5, they have a motivational and explanation associated with the commandment. It's not just the commandment, there's an explanation, and that's intended to be a motivation for us to get right with God. And Jesus summarizes the first 4 really well. Jesus says, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. The second set of commandments that we're going into here are about getting right with your community, with your neighbor, with your brothers and sisters, with your community, your broader community. It's the first set of commandments and the second set of commandments, it's a harmony. It's a harmony. There's this, what I call you've heard the circle of life? I call it the circle of love, right? So if we are right with God, if we're right with God, we can be right with our neighbor. And if we're right with our neighbor, we can be right with God. It's kind of a magical circle there. So the 6th commandment is what we're looking at today. And the 6th commandment is the first one without an explanation, no explanation given. The commandment says, you must not murder. That's in Exodus 20:13. It's one verse. If you're looking at it in Hebrew, it's 2 words. Lo tertzak. That's it. Short and to the point. It's an imperative. The must there, must not, it's an imperative. It's kind of like what you say to your kids when they're running out in the street, stop. There's no explanation needed for that, right? Everybody knows what's going on. This is an imperative. It's a drop the mic moment for God. God understands the sanctity of life, and it is so clear to him. What this commandment is really about is how we live, not how we die. Love, not hate. What's our sermon title? The sermon title is Thou Shalt Live. That's what this commandment's about. Jesus goes on to say, after he's told us what the greatest commandment is, he goes on to say, and second is equally important, love your neighbor as who, we all know this, as who? Yourself, right? What this means is, what Jesus is saying is, we have to value the lives of others just like we value our own lives. And we value our own lives. You know, we take precautions. If there's ice on the roads, we don't go out. If we don't swim well, we don't jump in the deep end of the pool. We value our lives on a daily basis. We need to think about, are we doing that same, or do we have that same value? Do we have that same concern for our neighbor or for our community? That's what that means. It's kind of a high standard. So all of society, whether secular or religious, it doesn't matter, and pretty much throughout history, they have this natural instinct to say, to repel from murder, right? It's just natural. It's horrible, right? It's just heinous. Everyone repels from murder. So, and what they'll do then, what secular governments and religious governments do is, murder is one of those crimes that is the worst crime, and it ends up being elevated to the worst punishments. It's pretty much universal. But why? Why? Why is it that way? Why do we have this natural instinct to respond? So all of you that have kids or grandkids or nieces and nephews, or you're a teacher or, exposed to kids, right? You've experienced this. So it's the little ones, right? Like 3 to 5 years old. And you say, look, don't hurt your sister. And what do they start with? Why? Now, these are sincere whys. They're 3 to 5, right? Well, why? Well, it's not nice. Well, why isn't it nice? Well, it makes your sister cry, and you don't want your sister to cry. Well, why don't I want? Right, there it goes, right? We know it. But as a parent or an adult, we take that as a teaching moment, right? This is our teaching moment. They don't know. They really don't know. So we take the opportunity to set the ground rules so that they understand why. And we do that until we finally get to that last why, where we say, what? Because I said so, right? Eventually you get there. Then when your teenagers get to be teenagers, the whys turn, it kind of reverses. So they're not asking the why anymore. You've answered all their whys. They've asked all the questions. You've set all of the ground rules, and now you're asking why, right? So why did you start playing games, video games, before you tidied your room? Because we know the ground rules on Saturday morning is everybody tidies the house, and then we play video games. So why are you behaving this way? And sometimes you don't give the explanation of why this is important, right? Sometimes you just say why. And sometimes you know the answer, sometimes you don't. But what you're really trying to do is engage your teenager in a little bit of grace, right? A little bit of confession maybe, and a little bit of grace. You want to give them grace there. So the why is important. The why shouldn't be forgotten. It shouldn't be left to natural instinct. Why brings meaning. Why is an anchor. And the why here, the why of you must not murder, is that each of us is created in God's image, each of us. Each one of us, set apart. God set us apart. He created us differently, literally differently. He didn't speak us into existence like he did the rest of creation. The stars and the moon and the galaxies and the land and the water and the birds and the bugs. He spoke them into existence, and they're amazing. They are awesome. But he created us differently. He molded us with his hands, and he breathed his life into us, his spirit into us. He gave us a moral compass. We all have one. We call it a conscience. Why, might we ask? Why did he do that? He gave us the ability to choose the right thing. That's why. He wanted us to have the ability to be in relationship with him as loving and loved sons and daughters. That's why. He wanted us to have the ability to be in relationship with others, just as we're in relationship with him. That's why. Why is important. He made us to love and to choose the good thing. He made us to live. He made us in his image, each one of us. Each one of us is in his likeness. The person you came with, in his likeness. The person sitting next to the person you came with, in his likeness. The person 2 rows up that you're thinking, who is that? I haven't seen him before. Made in his likeness. every one of us. And if he made us in his image to love and live, how much does it grieve him? How much does it grieve him when hate and anger and jealousy, you name the passion of the heart, you name it, warps the way we see someone or we see an entire group of people? And when we're warped, it leads us to choosing the bad thing. Hate over love, death over life. You must not murder. Remembering the why is important. It's meaningful. It's our anchor. We live in a fallen world. We know that. And according to Adam Hamilton, who wrote the book Words of Life that we've been using throughout this series, he's done some research and he has some pretty unsettling statistics in his research. According to his research, there's 16,000 murders a year in the US. Now, that's down from the 1980s. In the 1980s, it was more like 30,000. So it's been trailing down. That's a good thing, but we're seeing an uptick. So we saw an uptick in 2019 and 2020, and they expect an uptick in 2021 as well. It's not headed in the right direction. It's on the rise again. He also tells us that the last 100 years in his book have been the deadliest ever, that there were 100 million people who died a violent death. 100 million people. And some of those millions were mass murdered. We call that genocide. We don't like to say mass murder, right? Those atrocities that we get that feeling in our stomach when we say mass murder, but they happen. They happened in the 1940s. 4 years, right? About 4 years. 6 million plus Jews murdered. Then 30 short years later in the 1970s, another about 4 years, there were 1.5 to 3 million Cambodians murdered. That range is so big because the atrocities were so heinous, we don't know how many died. And 1 million Tutsis and Hutus were mass murdered in the 1990s in Rwanda. Now, for the atrocities in the 40s and the 70s, it took about 4 years. 1 million in 100 days. What were you doing 100 days ago? It was like Memorial Day weekend. Planning for the kids to get out of school, planning that vacation for the 4th of July, and here we are back from vacation, right? In that short amount of time, nearly 1 million people were murdered. Let that sink in. He goes on to explain how would God feel about this. So this quote is from him, and I think it's so meaningful. Adam Hamilton says, "Human suffering grieves the heart of God, particularly when it comes in the wake of such violence and terrible pain. We live in a fallen world. Each one of us is tarnished." Oh, wait a minute. Well, okay, I'm tarnished. Yeah, I get that. I am, but not nearly as tarnished as her or him or them. What about them? They don't worship like me. They don't vote like me. They don't eat the same food I eat. They don't celebrate the same holidays I celebrate. They don't take care of their health the same way I take care of my health. And they certainly don't love their neighbor like I do. Those theys, they're nothing like me, and they're a threat to me and my ways. Oh yeah, there it is. Comes right out of somebody's mouth. But only to a friend or a trusted group in social media, right? They feel like I do. But it didn't start on social media. it started in the heart. It starts in the heart and leads to our inability to see the image of God in them. The ones that don't look like God because they don't look like me. I'm going to tell you something here, and I hope it sets you free. The value and worth of someone does not depend on how much they look like someone else. That's not the measure. That's not the measure at all. The worth and value, your worth and value, it comes from God. Their worth and value, it comes from God. Because He created us for love and life and relationship with Him. Did you hear that? Did you hear that? God says who you are. God says who you are. And He says who they are too. And He says you are His children. Our value and worth is not based on anything we do. It's not based on what someone says about us. It's based on what God does and what God says about us. It's based on the fact that we have been created and set apart to be in a personal relationship with our Creator, the great I Am. God says we're His children. So is that the best thing you've heard today or ever? We are defined by God. I hope that sets you free. Murder's not a new thing, it's an old thing. The first murder in the Bible was in the first book of the Bible. It's in Genesis. The story of Cain and Abel, the event of Cain and Abel, most of us may know that. We'll talk through it. So it's in Genesis 4, verses 3 through 15. It's going to be on the screen. It's kind of a long passage, but I do want to read it because there's so much in here, and I'd like to emphasize some of it for us. When it was time for the harvest, Cain presented some of his crops as a gift to the Lord. Abel also brought a gift, the best portions of the firstborn lambs from his flock. The Lord accepted Abel and his gift, but the Lord did not accept Cain and his gift. This made Cain very angry, and he looked dejected. God says, "Why are you so angry?" The Lord asked Cain, "Why do you look so dejected? You'll be accepted if you do what's right. But if you refuse to do what's right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you. But you must subdue it. You must subdue it and be its master." One day, Cain suggested to his brother, "Let's go out into the fields." And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Afterward, the Lord asked him, "Where's your brother? Where's Abel?" "I don't know," Cain responds, "Am I my brother's guardian?" But the Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are cursed and banished from the ground, which has swallowed your brother's blood. No longer will the ground yield good crops for you, no matter how hard you work. From now on, you will be a homeless wanderer on the earth." Cain will be lost. From the very beginning of this event, Cain is not in the right place. The gift that he brings is less than what God expects. God had already set the ground rules. God rejects Cain's gift. God didn't bring his A game, and being a farmer, which he was, he didn't bring his A grain either. I had to get a joke in. This is a really serious topic, right? Some of his crop, that's not like a superlative. It kind of means whatever I find laying around, maybe in the bottom of the grain elevator, if they had them back then, right? On the other hand, Abel brings the best portion of his flock. When you are in front of God, can I tell you, and you bring him a gift and you want to honor God with your best. Now, your best may not be as beautiful as you think somebody else's best is, but that's not what matters to God. It's just as beautiful to God because he knows the desire of your heart. So what does Cain, in the beginning, when Cain brings this gift that's not acceptable, what does God ask? He asks two why questions. Why? Why? God knows the why, and so does Cain. Remember our first 4 commandments about having your heart right with God? Cain wasn't there, not even close. He hadn't gotten his heart right with God. The harmony, that circle of love was already disrupted in Cain. Then God gives him a warning. If Cain doesn't do the right thing, sin is crouching. Do you see the imagery there? Sin is crouching. Do you see the imagery of a beast, a snarling beast, right? And what happens when something crouches? What's going to happen next? The moment you think what's going to happen next, it's already happened. It's a split second. It's surprising. It's like lightning. They pounce. They pounce. That's the imagery we have there. He warns Cain, get a hold of that beast. Get a hold of that sin. And he gives him an imperative. You must subdue it. You must. You must wrestle it and master it. Cain doesn't heed that warning either. He doesn't master his sin. We can tell from the rest of the story. How long Cain stewed, a week, a month, a day, we don't know. But over time, his anger became hate. And instead of turning to God with a desire to change his heart and become right with God and become right with Abel, his heart was a stone. It's only a stone-cold heart that could answer, I don't know. Am I my brother's guardian? Only a stone-cold heart. He hadn't done the right thing, and sin pounced. It pounced. As much as Cain's behavior reveals his heart in this story, God's actions reveal his heart as well. What was it that Adam Hamilton said? He said, human suffering grieves the heart of God, particularly when it comes in the wake of such violence and pain. Do you hear God's heart in this event? Where's your brother? Where's Abel? Do you hear the concern? Do you hear the grief? When he says to Cain, now you are cursed. Do you hear the justice in that? And do you hear the disappointment? Cain's anger drove him to a crime of murder. The murder was wrong. It deserved punishment. It received punishment. But what are we getting at here? I'm not a murderer. Most people in the United States are not murderers. There's 350 million people in the United States. There are 16,000 plus murders. Not everyone in the United States is a murderer. Most of us aren't. How does this relate to me or to you? And when we ask that question, who do we turn to when we're trying to figure out how things relate? We turn to Jesus. And Jesus tells us a little bit about murder in Matthew 5:21 and 22. And then again, he talks a little bit about it in 15:19 through 20. So they'll be on your screen. You've heard that our ancestors were told, you must not murder. If you commit murder, you're subject to judgment. But I say, if you are even angry with someone, you're subject to judgment. If you call someone an idiot, you're in danger of being brought before the court. And if you curse someone, you're in danger of the fires of hell. Now, judgment, right? We got 2 judgment things there. We murder, we're going to be judged. Okay, that's pretty severe. If we even have anger, it kind of sounds like he's associating the same judgment, right? To the murder one as well. Then we get down to, well, if you call people names, you're going to go to court. Well, all of those are a little fuzzy. Judgment, maybe somebody will be lenient. Court, I can deal with court, right? But the last one, when he says you curse someone, and what that means when you curse someone, it means that you've called them of no value. You have no value. You have no worth. You isolate them. They're dead to you, right? They're dead to you. You've cursed them out of your life, taken them out of your life, like Cain took Abel out of his life. And that one's pretty clear. You're subject to the hells of fire. Not judgment in court. That one, we know what that means, right? So he goes on to say, How do we explain that? But the words you speak from the heart, that's what defiles you. For from the heart come evil thoughts, murder, and all the other ones there. These are what defile you. The word these in the last verse there, it's these evil thoughts. These evil thoughts that come from your heart, that's what defiles you. Your heart defiles you. Okay, so what Jesus is talking about here is not the act of murder. It's not even close to the act of murder. It's something a whole lot less than that. He's talking about our thoughts and our words. Proverbs tells us death and life are in the power of the tongue. Both, literally, in the power of the tongue. When someone hits you, if they hit you or you're injured in some way, there's pathways in your brain that fire. And those pathways, first of all, tell you you're injured and you're hurt and you feel pain. And then the next thing it tells you is this is a bad situation. You should probably do something about that. And there's confusion that can set in. And so I don't know if any of you have been hurt like that or hit, right? But it's a really, really an unpleasant thing, even beyond the pain, even beyond the pain. And so what happens if someone is spoken to in a vile way? The same pathways fire. That's why you feel like you've been sucker punched in the stomach when someone says something mean, or maybe you read it on social media. Maybe you've experienced this. I hope you haven't. Words hurt people. Hurtful words hurt people physically hurts them. Words of hate dehumanize individuals and entire people groups. And the interesting thing is, the people who speak hurtful words, they're that crouching sin. They're that beast. It dehumanizes them. Jesus is telling us our words, the way we speak to each other, they matter. They matter because they can be hurtful and harmful. If anger's not mastered, it can quickly lead to sin. So what's the right thing? God told Cain, there's a right thing. If you do the right thing, it's all going to be okay. Jesus tells us the right thing. It's that harmony. It's that balance, the balance between the love of God and the love of neighbor. You can't have one without the other. He's telling us what we speak and think, that's what's in our heart. It's hard to hide your heart. It's impossible to hide your heart from God. Your words give your heart away. Words of life or death, soft or hard. Your words answer the why. Jesus tells us, so if you're presenting a sacrifice at the altar in the temple and you suddenly remember that someone has something against you, leave your sacrifice there at the altar. Go and be reconciled to that person. Then come and offer your sacrifice to God. Go and make it right with your neighbor. If you want to honor God with your best gift, go and make it right with your neighbor. Jesus tells us the right thing, and it starts with forgiveness. He wants us to forgive and reconcile. He wants us to speak life. He wants us to be merciful. He wants us to love our enemies. He wants us to love peace. When we love peace, we don't look like us or them. We look like Him. We'll be the image of Him. And there's a promise that comes along with being a peacemaker. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children, sons and daughters, children of God. God gives us opportunities and instructions and motivations to do what's right. Do you know why? It breaks His heart. It breaks His heart to see the destruction that anger and hate cause for all His children, for the innocent and the angry alike. We can't carry these feelings in our hearts and still be okay with God. Think about how grieved God was for Abel, how disappointed he was with Cain. God doesn't want any of his children, to suffer the consequences of anger and hate. Murder starts well before the murder. We have to be aware of how quickly crouching anger can turn to hate, and how even more quickly that sin of hate can pounce and devour you, or a relationship you once valued, or a relationship with God. Will you bow your heads with me as we reflect a little bit? What is God saying to you today? Is he asking you why? Why do you have unchecked negative feelings for his child? Whether it's a family member, a friend, a coworker, a neighbor, someone that did you wrong or showed you up, or an enemy, an opponent, someone or some group of people that hold an opposing view to yours and somehow that threatens you? Is he asking, why don't you see the value and worth I created and I assigned? If so, there's a way back. There's always a way back with our God. And it starts in the heart. It starts with forgiveness. It's that magic harmony, the magic circle of love. We need to be right with God to be right with our community. And we need to be right with our community to be right with God. One doesn't exist without the other. If it all seems kind of difficult and overwhelming and you don't know how to forgive, God understands. Just go to him. He wants you to come to him. He wants you to bring your best heart. He's not asking for a perfect heart. He wants you to bring a desire to have your heart transformed. He wants you to bring the desire to forgive and be forgiven. He wants you to lay down your burdens before him. He wants to give you grace and mercy and forgiveness and transform your heart. Ask him to give you a new heart and a renewed spirit. He'll do it. The altars are open. We invite anyone to come up and kneel and pray, or you can pray at your seat. Let's have a time of prayer while we sing this last song.
Just going to move into a time of prayer right now. I know this is such a subject and a topic and an emotion that touches all of us. We see it in the world around us. There is so much anger. We have hurt each other. There are wounds all around us. And I am so thankful we have a God who wants to bring healing. He wants us to let go of all that bitterness, that anger. Let's stand together. God, we are thankful for your son, Jesus, who literally embodied what it meant and means to not just the physical act of murder, but to allow our hearts to be filled with bitterness and hate, to get to a place where we do not value someone else. We do not see their value. We do not see your image in them. So God, I ask that you would forgive us. Forgive me. Forgive me for the moments where I have allowed wounds and hurt to lead my mind and heart to places you did not want. Help us, we pray. Thank you for what you offer to us as we prepare to receive this meal together, this reminder. It is not lost on the fact that I know who, and as I think about that table of those who were sitting around you, God, people you knew who would turn on you and abandon you, and yet you still offered them all of you. And so, God, your grace and your forgiveness is offered to us today. To anyone who would receive your forgiveness, you offer it today. Thank you. For it's in your name I pray. Amen.